tests beefed up compared to what we had in the very beginning. And so this effort started well over a year ago. And at one time we had lots of contributors and it kind of fell off, so I stopped having the meetings. That is, I understand from a lot of people in the community reaching out to me, there is some desire to resurrect this. So phase 0 really was, we needed to first identify what E2E tests we needed. In that, we also, my team created a framework for the E2E tests that's reusable between all the plugins. Release to release, we identified gaps and regressions. So what we would do, each release of Cube, we would go back through all the bugs that were filed and figure out, could we have written a test that would have identified this bug? Or is this a regression from one release to the next? And what can we write to prevent that from happening again? And then ideally what we wanted to do was create like a minimal testing framework for each of the features that we would, as a reviewer, have an expectation that anyone committing a new feature to storage would need to have, you know, these 5 things. We never really kind of circled on that because each of the plugins is so different. But I have confidence that we could come up with a generalized list of what your E2E test should look like if you have a new plugin. And, you know, since our focus will be shifting to CSI, I think we could probably move what we feel like that looks like. And also with that, we have less control with things moving to CSI. But since that's still a multi-year effort, I think we can continue to improve things that are in tree. Any questions before I move on?
Nope.
Okay. So this is kind of where we are now, and then the next slide we'll talk about next steps. So really the crux of the problem with the E2E tests is that it doesn't run in the CI. It's been disabled. For a long time, we were trying to figure out flakes, and adding the E2E test to the CI just provided another level of complexity that we didn't need. It also doesn't run many of the plugins since it runs on Google Cloud. It was basically that and Gluster were the only ones being tested. So ideally what we want to be able to do is provide E2E testings within the CI for all cloud providers, and that is very complicated. And that's not complete. We at one time had a vendor wishing to contribute hardware and people to that effort, and that has since changed. And we also, as I mentioned before, had kind of a loss in interest. So I'm up for any suggestions on how we can actually make this possible. One thing we might be able to do is, I had talked with the CNCF testing team at KubeCon in Austin, and they are interested in having a platform for doing multi-cloud testing anyways for Kubernetes in it. And so we might be able to maybe use some of their hardware. So I'm gonna throw that out there. So that's just a thought, to be able to get all the cloud providers as part of the CI. So what are the action items? First of all, we need to resurrect the bi-weekly testing call. It was always a productive call. Ask anyone wishing to contribute tests or work on tests, attend. We review what is in flight, what needs to be done, and assign those out, and do a typical Scrum, you know, of all the different things that are open. Identify providers for hosting the cloud tests. As I mentioned, CNCF might be one, but I'm open to anyone that wants to contribute. And really determine a realistic way long-term to make that happen. There's a lot of process involved in making this a concrete way of doing it, and I don't have a right answer for it. And then lastly would be getting a commitment from vendors for not only contributing tests, but supporting this beyond just, we're gonna provide some tests and then we're done with it and hopefully the tests run. I think we need, and this is, we can talk about this and change it, but I really think it needs to be like a 6-month commitment when something is contributed to E2E, to say, I'm not only gonna commit the tests, I'm gonna make sure that they work and work on the platform that we have. And I see that as a 6-month commitment. That is where we are from an E2E testing perspective. I am happy and excited to lead those calls and to get this effort rolling. I have had a lot of interest as an aside from people pinging me in the community, so I think it's a good time to do that. I want to know if there's anyone in the room who has an idea of how we integrate this well with the CI and support all the cloud platforms. I guess that's about it. Questions? Ideas?
Questions, comments, they want to ask this?
Does anybody want to participate? Do we have anybody that wants to be part of the?
Yeah, we've got at least one volunteer here. Two. So yeah, let's get the bi-weekly call set up and let's get this ball rolling here. Actually.
Okay, and there's just one more swizzle to this. I'm on part of this onboarding committee through Google that's helping get more contributors into Kubernetes, and they have a focus group. They're going to start with storage, and part of that is getting people working on testing. So out of the gate, we might have some noobs to this area also be able to help contribute. So I know there's only, what Saad said, 2 volunteers in the room, but I think we can quickly grow this into something meaningful.
Nice. So. There was one more question in the room.
Sure.
I was just wondering what the current issue is with integrating with CI and why that hasn't been done. I thought the E2E tests were running in CI, so maybe I'm just a little bit confused there.
So
Go ahead, Brad, since you're there.
There's a lot of different cloud provider types. So we have some stuff running in GCE, but we don't have, we have 2 different file system types in Amazon, one in Azure, one in OpenStack. We're not doing any E2E tests there. Yeah. We don't have cluster tests. We don't have NFS tests. And some of that was, okay, so running tests in GCE is a little complicated because you guys have some weird operating system as part of the container. And we didn't necessarily have drivers for all the different file system types to run, against. So we were waiting on the mock propagation work to come in so we could run the drivers in a container and not worry about what's on the host. So that was one prerequisite for getting for getting the non-cloud provider types running in GCE. We could get non-cloud provider types in GCE, but we still would need something in Azure, AWS, and an environment for OpenStack to really have full coverage.
So it sounds like the immediate goal is going to be to expand CI from just one cloud provider to hopefully many. And once that's done, continue to expand the set of tests across all of those cloud providers to get better coverage.
We need someone to pony up the resources, quite frankly. We need someone from Azure to say, hey, here's cloud time on Azure. We need someone from Amazon to do the same. And probably we need someone from the SIG to go chase that down. So
And I can help chase that down. I really want to collaborate as well with the Kubernetes testing SIG, which was pretty new when we first engaged them and didn't have the resources either. But I think I need to check back in with both the CNCF and the general Kubernetes cloud to see if maybe there's time to borrow on those machines. And if not, I agree, Brad, we need to chase up time on those commitment from those cloud providers.
So technically we're just stuck on the cloud providers. We've made progress on the bare metal file system types. And Jan's made a bunch of progress in getting the mock propagation stuff worked into the tests.
Awesome.
We should open that up pretty soon. It's the cloud provider type, so probably not.
Jan is also working on things like that. Yeah, Jan is also working on things like that. It is not provided specifically as SIG and cluster and
So the bare metal.
yeah, the RPD stuff. So making sure those tests are containerized and they can run on GCE directly rather than requiring any special hardware or like. Yeah, so those are covered, but like I think the main problem is with the cloud provider dependent storage. Like we don't have a proper representation. Like we have had like vSphere was broken in 1.10 for several reasons. The cloud provider name was like underscore in it, like VMware underscore cloud dash provider, and that's not DNS. Like that's not allowed by the naming thing. So we fix that in a follow-up. So these kind of issues could be caught if we had E2E test that run.
So there's a good starting point. We only had the SIG leader from vSphere here. Over there. So if we wanted to run end-to-end tests against vSphere,
Yeah,
do you guys have resources for that?
we do. We just came forward.
You could be our shining example to the other global cloud providers.
Okay, so we secured resources for testing on vSphere about 2 weeks ago, I believe it was. And Clint isn't here yet, but I think he knows more about it than I do. But we have a data center accessible to do that. It's going to take some work to set up those resources because right now it's servers with vSphere, but obviously it needs a little more than that.
So how can we run, how should we divide the labor, I guess? Is it something that should be in our SIG or should it be in your SIG?
I think if it's storage-specific tests, that even are comparable to pre-existing ones, that it probably should originate here. And
It'll be vSphere
Yeah.
specific tests. We want to end-to-end test like vSphere provisioning.
Right. But I agree having this separate SIG testing call seems appropriate. I know, Steve, you've been on those in the past and we worked through that. I mean, I think we have the right audience here. It is an additional call, but I think this is the right place to start.
Since Azure and AWS have been somewhat cumbersome to get involved, can we use vSphere as like our pilot?
it's fine by me. I may not be the actual person doing the work, but I'll find somebody who is, so we can put a name on it. But I don't have that name now.
Okay. I think that'd be good because if if we got everything working right on vSphere, we can use that as an example to the other cloud providers.
Yeah, that sounds like a good opportunity. So I think that means that we not only get these tests working, but document what was involved so that the process gets documented to make it worthy of getting ported to other platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that's a good start rather than trying to boil the ocean and get them all at once. If we can get one working, we at least have a better feel for how it's going to integrate well within the CI and any problems we might have. So thank you, Steve, for volunteering that.
Okay.
So we need to, so which SIG will figure out like how often these tests will run. Like they cannot be blocking or there has to be like
Ownership.
yeah.
Like we need to figure out like how often these tests run, whether they run on each peer, and whether they're blocking, or like so.
So there's some precedence for that. So we can do that. There's documents on like how to periodically run tests. You don't run them against every PR, it's
Yeah.
against every build. And we
Yeah.
can block.
Yeah, but some SIG someone has to own that, right? They're going to visit the test infra.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think the answer to that is the answer with everything in CSI. With CSI, we're going to be moving a lot of the volume plugins out. Brad and I talk a lot about this. I feel like a lot of the cloud provider specific plugins are going to end up in the cloud provider SIG. So the AWS one will actually end up in SIG AWS. It sounds like the vSphere CSI driver is going to end up in the VMware SIG. And any end-to-end tests around that CSI driver should be the responsibility of those SIGs to maintain.
To start up, we'll want to test the M3 stuff, right? We've been putting this off for so long.
Right. And
Yeah, my belief is that it might take a while because these cloud providers are undergoing a similar thing to the storage plugins where they're moving out of tree. And there isn't a firm deadline for that to happen, but it isn't going to be the next release. And I'd rather get started on the entry one for now to do this because you're not changing two things at once. Changing out the storage plugin and the cloud provider at the same time just sounds like more complexity and things that could go wrong. So
I think all the pieces are here to get the EE test running on vSphere without too much trouble. We'll have to write the test infrastructure and the testing pieces, but if you have the hardware and
yeah, and since occasionally I believe there are patches backported to legacy releases, there might be some value in just getting the test case done. And it doesn't necessarily mean that as soon as a new release comes out, you never are going to run the old test again. So there is some value for testing that in tree.
The Kubernetes have a lot of these tests already. A lot of these begin-ways. We specific tests don't run them, but there's a lot of churn there. Tests being continuously added, updated. So
getting them into CI would be valuable.
Yeah, very, very valuable. And I think, but we will need a way of test infra requires a command how the cluster will be up.
Put it in a bucket. Put the results in a bucket.
That's another way of doing it. So but still test it for the command itself that kicks the to test needs a way of either starting a cluster or you have to have a cluster already running. So that's the I think
and it sounds like you guys will be able to help with something along those lines.
How many people are in the VMs or the VMware SIG?
The meeting a couple times ago hit 21 attendees online. Now, those aren't all developers. We're specifically inviting end users to come and participate in feature requests, issues, whatever. So,
do you have a core developer competency there, or is it?
It's kind of a mixture of people, of developers, support people. We definitely have access to the VMware engineering teams, and Tushar has been a regular attendee of this group, and I know that his team has already written some of the test cases that are.
Okay, so he'd be a good SME. That's what I was digging for, is if we had a developer SME.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to go back to the ranch and get some names assigned to this, because it's not that we don't have any. It's almost like there's so many that I'm going to have to find out who the best candidate is.
That's a good problem to have.
So important to remember is it's not just the volume plugins that need to be tested. We've got a huge core volume subsystem that is not very well tested. Michelle discovered this recently with the subpath feature. One way to fix it is all the new features that we're writing, resizing, snapshots. Make sure that you write very extensive unit and end-to-end tests and integration tests for them. Don't let that be an afterthought. As reviewers, there's some of you who are approvers in this group. Make sure that you ask and look for end-to-end tests and unit tests. We have to develop a culture where testing is not an afterthought. Michelle, is there anything you want to add to that?
Sure. It might be good to also invest some resources in developing a good volume testing framework that you can swap in and out any volume driver. This could be especially easy for CSI. For those volume features that are kind of generic to any volume type, like just mounting or mounting, just really basic things like that. If we even have a framework where you can just say, run this basic volume test against my CSI driver, have it easy for you. That would be very beneficial.
Wasn't there CSI testing
CSI has testing of the components, the CSI specific components. Luis is not here to come on. Is helping with a lot of that. But that's a really good point that Michelle has. A lot of these volume plugins, you mentioned that vSphere has a lot of tests around provisioning. I think there's a bunch of tests around GC, EPD, but there's a lot of volume plugins that are not very well tested. The patterns that we're going to do are going to be identical for most of these volume plugins. So if we could have a harness that these volume plugins can use, that makes it really easy to have a battery of tests, that would be super valuable. Erin, maybe we can add that as one of the items to track for this this new group that's forming.
Yep, I'll add that to this slide and also incorporate that into the agenda for the first call.
Cool. Anybody else have comments, questions, concerns? Sure.
Yeah, so I had one idea that I shared yesterday with Saad regarding how we can, highlight the test efforts. So currently we are maintaining the planning spreadsheet where we have the developer name for every new feature that is we are working on the release, and we also have the reviewers name there. However, what we are missing right now is the test owner name. Even though it is very much possible that the same developer going to write the test cases, but having that explicitly mentioned will give a little more weightage to the value of the test. And in case we are missing any name there, that will be coming to attention. It is also possible that some other person can explicitly go ahead and write the test cases. That will eventually, hit in closing the gap with the test cases.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I say let's do it for the next planning session. Remind me. We'll add a column for testing and track that as something that is responsible for. All right. Any other comments, suggestions, concerns, questions? Sure.
Should we move for delivery? Should we work with the SIG apps? Much more higher testing, stateful workloads. Should this testing efforts go into Kubernetes repository or some yes.
So the question, if you didn't hear it, was whether we should be working more closely with SIG apps or some other SIG for stateful workload level testing, and where those efforts should reside. Does anybody have?
SIG apps should test their own stuff. I mean, the reality is like there's weird database things that happen to storage that are just beyond our knowledge. We can't test every database application and how its consistency pattern is against NFS. You know what I mean? That's what we do, weird bugs like that all the time. Someone's trying to run over ITB against an NFS DB that doesn't work. You know, like I think it's beyond the scope of our group too.
But I think there's some, we have some long-standing stateful sets that works right. That we have either fixed it or we believe this stuff's right. And our tests, like storage tests, pretty good. I think there's almost no stateful tests. E2E testing is not storage. So it's like it's somewhere in the middle. So we need to have like some stateful set tests to make sure that the feature that we work.
So technically, stateful sets is owned by SIG apps.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there is not extensive testing around it. Sean?
Yeah, SIG apps has a bunch of stateful set tests, and they do test dynamic partitioning for all storage classes. And then for local PPI, I added a bunch of stateful set tests for domestic volume.
We can definitely work closer with SIG apps. If there's gaps that we've identified, we can work with try to fill those. But I think the right home for it is SIG apps. All right. Any other comments, questions? All right, cool. I think we can wrap it up. Thank you very much, Erin.
All right, thanks, guys.